Hey, good morning, guys, and welcome to RSA Day 3 with Security Weekly. I am your host for this morning, Jessica Davis, SC Media's healthcare editor, and I am here today with the CEO of Ordr, Greg Murphy. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's great to talk about some medical devices. It's been a really hot topic here, hasn't
Ab-
it? Yeah.
Absolutely. It's great to see finally that the world is waking up and paying a lot of attention to this issue.
I mean, we went on that discussion yesterday, and I think that it was really heartening to see like so many people in the room talking about medical devices. And I think for those who weren't here, I think maybe a good place to start is sort of what is drawing this attention and what sort of top of mind pressing challenges wise for the healthcare sector.
So I think when I think about healthcare right now and in cybersecurity, just one issue is just the sheer explosion in the number of connected devices that are being used in the healthcare environment, where it's literally growing at about 25, 26% per year. So every 3 to 4 years, doubling the number of connected devices and just a huge variety of different devices. And so IT organizations, security organizations are having to scramble to keep up with just the pace of devices coming on the network. And then you couple that with the kind of rise in the intensity and the frequency of attacks, and in particular ransomware. All of this coming at a time where we also are seeing increased regulatory attention. So you have the Congress talking about these issues. All of the boards of directors, boards of trustees of hospitals are very focused on this. And then the poor healthcare IT organizations that are struggling to just find security talent. So you put those factors together, and I think it's caused people to realize that this is really a huge issue for not just security, but just for the operations of healthcare, operations of hospitals. And this is something that could dramatically impact patient safety if we don't get it right.
It was nice to see everyone bringing that to attention. It was more of a why are we talking about it wasn't more of a why are we talking about this. It's like, please help me with this problem,
Right.
because you can't just put a firewall around it, can you?
No, they're just when you have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of devices, it's awfully hard to put a firewall in front of every single one of those devices.
You don't think anyone's ever tried that, have you?
Be a fairly expensive proposition. But it is good to see. I feel like for several years, people were talking about the issue, and we were really just as an industry kind of admiring the problem and staring at it, studying it. And now we're hearing people talk about what can we actually do? What are practical steps that we can take to make sure that healthcare and patients are more secure?
Yeah. And what's also been heartening too is I feel like even in the last 3 months, maybe even shorter time, the FDA and Congress have really started to take action on a few things. I know the one that everyone's talking about the most is the Patch Act, because it includes most of the asks that we've been looking for, right? You want to talk about that and sort of what gets you excited about that? And then we can, yeah.
I think that the Patch Act is hugely significant, because if you look at the reality of the world of medical devices, there are a lot of different manufacturers, and some firms that have been taking security fairly seriously and have been building in advanced security capabilities into their products for a number of years. But then you've got dozens, hundreds of other manufacturers with much lesser capabilities. And so I think this is an opportunity where the government, the FDA, can step in and establish some baseline practices. If you are going to be manufacturing medical devices, those devices better have the following capabilities, and you have to implement practices and a life cycle approach to security for these devices. So that is hugely important, but I don't think we can sit back and say, oh, good, Congress is gonna act, the rest of us can kind of take it easy for a bit. Because you look at the simple fact in healthcare, a lot of our colleagues in IT forget that medical devices are designed very often to last 10, 12, 15 years. So the devices that have been manufactured and have been connecting to networks just in the past couple of years, those are going to be with us for an awfully long time, and those aren't going to be under the auspices of the Patch Act. So we got to do the right thing going forward, build security in, but we need to actually start now and start thinking about how we're going to protect all of the devices in the healthcare environment.
Well, that's like one of the great unsolvable challenges, right? I feel like even some of the best health systems in the country have admitted that there's just no way to really fix that problem. I mean, but there are ways to reduce it, right? Like I feel like we see this problem as such an insurmountable task that we forget that we don't need a hammer. We just need like a little tiny chisel, right?
Right. And just, and to prioritize. And I think you're right. If your goal is perfection, you're probably in the wrong industry. I mean, there's no way that we can prevent every attack, that we can close off every vector of attack in a network. What we can do is to start thinking really intelligently about how can we prevent some, and then when something happens, how do we mitigate the blast radius of that. So if something happens, if we've got a device on our network that is running Windows 7, for example, we know that that's a vulnerable operating system. So we can do things to make sure that we put defenses around those devices, that we enact policies that prevent people from outside the organization from being able to connect to those devices. So it doesn't mean we have to boil the ocean. It doesn't mean that we're going to clap our hands together and say, oh good, it's June 8th, it's Zero Trust Day, everything. But understanding where the vulnerabilities are and putting in layers of defense around those systems and those devices to make sure that if something goes wrong, it's not going to take down an entire hospital. Those are types of things that are very possible, and that's where we see the forward-thinking organizations really putting their energy now.
But there are forward-thinking ones, and I think that they're at least armed with staff to handle these sort of complicated issues. But I always like to ask the question, well, what about the little guys who are sort of, living with their Windows XP in some of the most peculiar places?
Right. So with the organizations where the security organization is named Bob, that's the
exactly.
Have a little bit of a different challenge than some of these, the major systems. But I think that right now the emphasis, across the industry really needs to be on, basic hygiene. Things. If you look at the healthcare environment, do you know what devices are connected, in the environment? Do you understand what they are and how they behave? And if you have that type of understanding, then you can start to think about, okay, now which are my most vulnerable devices and what can I do to protect those? But I think frankly, the only way that these smaller organizations can get by is with more automation. If you've got a few security resources, you need to make sure that they are getting accurate information and that they're able to prioritize where they're going to spend their limited time and resource. And you don't want them having to do manual tasks like running around trying to find a device and figure out, where is that infusion pump on our network, as opposed to, I know where it is, I know what its patch level is, let me go update it.
I mean, I've often, I'm not sure who it was, but they have often told me that, trying to do manual inventory is like pushing a rock uphill, basically. Because
it is, yeah. We think of it as kind of in San Francisco. It's like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. You get to one side, as soon as you've completed the inventory, it's out of date, and we have to think about, inventories. It's not just about identifying what the device is, but where is it? What is it doing? All of these things need to be kept up to date, and the only way you can do that on a real-time basis is through automation. And this is, there are tools that are able to help with that, and that's something that I think if organizations implement, they actually find they have more time because they're no longer having to use those precious resources, whether they're in security or they're in biomedical engineering or clinical engineering, trying to chase down and locate devices. I mean, that's the least efficient possible use of someone's time.
What I think is interesting too is that you're not the only medical device person I've spoken to that has basically said the same thing, which is just automate. So like I feel like it's like if you can only buy one thing, like, and you're really trying to tackle medical devices, at least like that's probably the best bet, at least to start, right?
I mean, if you don't start with visibility,
right,
then everything else that you build from that point forward is really going to be built on a very, very shaky foundation. So fundamentally, if you don't know what you've got, then you can't protect those devices.
Yeah.
And we always say that it's the device that you don't know about that's connected to your environment is the one that's probably the biggest risk, because you're almost an ironclad guarantee that if IT doesn't know about it, if clinical engineering doesn't know about it, it's probably not being patched, it's probably not being updated, and that's probably going to be the lowest hanging fruit at the point of greatest vulnerability that could be exploited. So.
I think we were talking about it earlier, and I think it's probably important to note, are attackers directly trying to get access to each of these devices? But what's the real threat behind this?
I think the real threat is, if I think about the attackers, and in particular ransomware, you just have to put your mindset in the frame that they are business people. And in a lot of cases, they're very good business people. They're criminals, but they are looking, by and large, to make money. And they don't make money by going out and targeting a particular device. They don't go out and make money by trying to cause damage to or to kill an individual person. What they're looking to do is to create chaos or the threat of chaos to take data, and that can disrupt operations. And that's what they're really looking for: is can we create a situation where the results of not paying this ransom is going to be so painful for the organization that they are going to have no choice but to do it. And so that is really the threat here, and where that impacts patient safety is in a healthcare environment. Anything that causes normal processes to be disrupted is something that can cause negative outcomes for patients. So I don't think we need to think about someone over in Russia targeting my mother when she's connected to an infusion pump. They're targeting the hospital. They're trying to disrupt operations and make money in the process.
Because it's not cost effective.
No, again, they're business people. There's no money to be made from that kind of precise attack on an individual in most cases versus can I disrupt operations and force a hospital which has cyber insurance, I think, can you force them to pay tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars? That's a much more effective business model, and that's where they're putting their time and energy.
What I think is interesting too, I think that a lot of people just sort of look at this as just this insurmountable thing, and they'll just work on other things instead. And I've often wondered, whether the carrot or stick model might work, and whether you think that we may be shifting toward a stick model if, the carrots that we have been given. I mean, there are so many free resources, or,
Right.
What are your thoughts on that? Like what can we expect?
No, I think someone was just recently saying to me, that the carrot and stick model is the carrot is there to get you just close enough they can hit you with the stick. And I think when you look at it, clearly, you're seeing more regulatory attention to this, and that's going to be something that that's hitting the manufacturers. Could definitely be something that impacts the providers as well. But actually, I really look and see the conversations we've been having recently has been about the cyber insurance providers and the conversations they're having with CISOs. And I heard earlier in this conference that for every dollar of revenue the cyber insurers took in last year, they paid out $1.09 in settlements. And so it's not a profitable business model. So they're going to be looking a lot more closely at the practices of the organizations. We're hearing this, that healthcare providers are sometimes struggling to get cyber insurance, or that the rates are going up. And so I think there's regulatory pressure, and then there's going to be business and financial pressure from insurers and from auditors and others to make sure that organizations are doing at least the basic hygiene, having their house in order, understanding what's connected in their environments, and are able to talk intelligently about what they're doing to protect those devices.
I've heard that on several occasions, and I think it's interesting too, because a lot of people are just like, well, just get the insurance, and it's like, well, you need to follow X, Y, and Z. But what happens if it's like this cyclical situation, right, where you can't get the insurance because you can't do this security, and it's like,
exactly.
Right.
And it's one of those things. I think every organization, they're looking at saying, we need the insurance. We want to have insurance. It is a little bit of a black art right now. If you ask a CISO, or you ask an organization, what determines the level, the rates that you pay for cyber insurance, and they kind of say, well, I'm sure they've got an actuarial model, but they don't show it to us. But by and large, you can see that the questionnaires that are coming out are getting much more detailed about what practices do you have in place, and having very subjective conversations as well to make sure that the insurer has confidence that the organization has basic protections in place and has plans to mitigate the impact of any incidents that do occur, so that the claim that they're responsible for is less. So this is a top of mind issue for every CISO I know right now.
For sure, and I certainly don't disparage the insurance company in this situation, just because it's a terrible business model, right?
Right.
The hackers are winning.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like insuring teenage drivers. It's you definitely you want to make sure that you've got some basic controls put in place over what they're able to do. And I think this problem is not going to go away. And I think that in a lot of cases there are really perverse incentives. Organizations get cyber insurance, and some levels that makes them a more attractive target for the bad guys, because they know that there's some pockets to go after, and that ransom might be paid. But if I'm running a major organization today, it would be very difficult for me to look my board in the eye and say, if cybersecurity is one of the biggest threats to our ongoing business operations, well, we darn well better have insurance against that. We better have plans to make sure that when there are incidents, that they're as small and as limited in scope as they could possibly be. And that again points to know your environment and making sure that you've taken measures to limit the blast radius of any incident that occurs.
We're running out of time, but my thought is, maybe let's speak to the smaller ones that are still not doing it. I mean, there are resources. There is the Health ISAC, which is probably worth a membership because at least you can see what's the most pressing thing, right? I mean, what are you telling those that are struggling the most?
I think those that are struggling the most, to say one, is focus on the initial steps, as we were talking about earlier. Get visibility into your environment, understand where your risks and vulnerabilities are. There are a lot of great resources out there. You mentioned HISAC and others, and I think that frankly, this is also an area where there's an opportunity for these organizations to start looking at some managed services partners as well who have the expertise, because most of these small community hospitals, they can't afford to go and bring 2, 3, 4 full-time employees on, but there are organizations that have expertise that can be made available to them to make sure that they're review their practices and to make sure that they've got some resources that when things are happening that they can bring on board. So.
Makes sense. Well, that's that's it for now. Thanks, Greg, for the great conversation.
I appreciate it.
Stay tuned, guys.